and welcome to the next part of consumer behaviour. This is chapter 8 from the book, where we look at the move in the international arena from print advertising and broadcast advertising into social and mobile media. So what we're going to look at in this section is how we can actually segment, because of using digital media, we can segment and target much more cleverly our advertising. The way that websites like Google work and how they actually bring up advertising. The dynamics of the different types of social media, how we can use them in our marketing strategy and the advantages that they have over other media. We also need to look at mobile media, the idea of sending short messages through the telephone service, and how effective is the social media compared to traditional types of advertising, and the changes in print and broadcasting media to actually catch up with electronic communications. And then also looking at which is best for our actual job and how to actually target our advertising. So impression-based targeting is where the adverts work on the data that they're actually collecting. So try and think about a time where you've been online, you're looking at something like an online newspaper, and the adverts pop up and they seem relevant to you because through cookies, the computer is collecting a lot of information about where you're actually clicking and what websites you're looking at. And so sometimes, because these slots are on the newspaper, the advertising slots are given out to a third party, they use the cookies on your computer to decide which adverts they should actually bring up. And so they target you in that actual way. And you might decide to click on those immediately. So for example, some of the British online newspapers, they use videos in part of the coverage. And while you click on to watch the video of the news, of course, first of all, there's a message that you can't skip past. You have to watch so many seconds of the message. And if you found that advertising interesting, you might actually click on it. So segment-based is more old-fashioned, the type of space in the media that you pay for. So you've got a particular generic advertising going on. So it's like broadcast advertising, but it's in a digital form. So you're not selecting anything special at all. You're just sending it out to everybody. So impression-based will work on the cookies on your computer, whereas the segment-based is a general overall advertising. So let's look at a little bit more detail at how Google works. So if you think about the Google page that you know, the advertising comes up on the right-hand side. So how does it do that? It's based on the actual query that you type into Google. So they're called sponsored spaces. And I have to admit, I think most of them actually block these out now. We're not even looking on that side of the screen. But people pay Google to actually put their advert on the top and right-hand side of the screen. This also happens with YouTube, because you know that was actually bought out by Google. So when we watch something on YouTube, we see the same type of adverts, even though they're video adverts. And even though we go to sites from Google, again, through the use of cookies, these advertisements actually follow us. So Google make money by people clicking on certain parts of the screen. So what are these dynamics of this social media, and what do we even mean by social media? And again, this could be quite cultural, because different countries use different types of social media. So whereas in this part of the world, Facebook is extremely popular, it's obviously popular in America and throughout Europe, there are other places like Russia and China where they have their own versions and they don't actually use the American Facebook itself. And of course, there's the different types of social media, and they start off small and then they get very, very popular, and sometimes it's a surprise. And so Twitter is also very popular, as is Instagram. And then young people use things like Snapchat. There's all sorts of things going on that you need to know about. So even on Instagram, even though it's about looking at people's pictures, while you look through your friend's feed, there are advertising pictures as well. And there are moving adverts, even though they only last a few seconds, through Instagram and many of the video-based social media like Vimeo, you will see actually moving adverts as well. So social media is, through the use of the internet and apps, people interacting and sharing and exchanging information and ideas and building up communities and networks. So it could be Facebook, could be Instagram, but it could be many other things as well. And much of the social media works through this idea of having a profile. So I think the most obvious one is something like Facebook, where you put up a picture. You can also put up a header, and you actually say something about yourself, and then you add your friends. You might belong to certain groups, such as there's probably a group for online learning students. There's definitely groups for this university. This university uses social media very well, actually. You might want to look at some of the things that it does. Years ago, we used to have forums. This is before social media existed. Now we sort of moved to this idea of discussion boards, and you can decide to be in things if you want to, and if you don't want to, it's very easy to opt out of them as well. So we talk about apps, which is the short word for applications, and so these are pieces of software installed on laptop, on a tablet, on a smartphone or whatever, and allow you to access this social media. And sometimes you access it in a different way. Like if you use Facebook on a laptop, it doesn't work exactly the same way. There are more options than the way you actually use it on a smartphone. And you store different types of information, and they force you really to store your date of birth on your gender, and you might not want to put anything else there at all. But some people are quite happy to share information with their friends, but they don't want other people to know what's going on. And so people like Facebook have many security options where you can actually lock up your page so only your own personal friends can actually see what you're doing, so that people don't see sensitive information, such as a picture of the front of your house, the information that you've gone on holiday, that type of thing. So if you're advertising through social media, what's the best thing to do? What should you be doing? Well, obviously looking at the interactions, isn't it? And so it's possible through specialised apps that you can actually look at what people say about you on Twitter. It's pretty easy to do that without an app anyway. You just go onto Twitter, search for your company name, and up will come every mention of your company. Because if there's quite a few hundred responses there, it's quite difficult to do. And so many companies actually pay a third party to actually do that work for them. So you can look at what people are saying about you publicly on Facebook, not privately, because you're not allowed. You can look at the public things that are on Twitter and on other types of social media. So your employees should be very, very well trained so that they don't do anything wrong. And sometimes in the press we see some very interesting stories about how employees have been very, very clever and responded to an angry customer in a way that was very funny, and then it gives them more exposure as well in the media. So sometimes the media is combined with different apps. You can link them together, so you can post something on Facebook and it will automatically go to Instagram, to Twitter at the same time. Is it effective? What some companies do is they make sure that the social media, the strategy for the marketing actually happens the same time as the traditional media. You might not need such a large budget, so this is suggesting you need more money, but in fact with social media you actually need less money because traditional broadcast media is so expensive. So one of the things that is brilliant about it is that you can track it. So whether you use Google Analyticals and learn to do it yourself, or whether you pay a programmer to do it for you, you can find out exactly how many people are clicking. One of the things you can do to try this out yourself is to create a Facebook page, maybe for something imaginary, and actually see how being a user of this Facebook page actually builds up a profile of the people that are clicking on it. So I have a page for the village that I live in, because we have a strawberry festival every year, and I actually, before the festival is up and coming, I start many posts to actually say the festival is coming up, and show pictures of things that happened last year or whatever. And then as the festival approaches, I can actually see how many people are actually clicking and sharing the things that I'm actually posting. So that's quite interesting. So the idea of this is it actually strengthens customer retention, customer awareness, so that you might have done this yourself actually on Facebook, like a real company, a real product, or a real service. And then when they actually post to that page, that will actually come up into your feed. So what is the difference between owned social media, paid social media, and earned social media? So owned social media is where messages are sent by the advertising company and get to the customer through the channels that they actually control. So that could be like your own YouTube channel. It's very popular in the UK for consumer goods, particularly food, that they actually have their own YouTube channel that they put little funny videos on and things. Paid social media is you send out through channels that you don't actually own. So for example, it's an online newspaper and your advertisement comes up in that slot depending on the cookies that the customers actually used. And then earned social media is where customers actually pass messages to each other, which they do, and so it's very important that you look at things like Facebook and Twitter to actually understand that there's no negative comments about what you're actually doing. So what are people using? Blogs and microblogs. So blogs are sometimes written from scratch, but often through a tool like Blogger or through WordPress, people decide to actually start publishing. So they might publish about a hobby that they have. Some people do it about the travelling that they're doing, and sometimes they get very popular. So some of the most popular blogs at the moment are by people who want to be in the fashion industry. They're interested in fashion, but they don't actually work in fashion. And so they put up pictures of the costumes that they've worn, photographs from people that they've taken in the street. Microblogging is just this idea of making comments in less than 140 characters on Twitter, as it were. And Twitter over the years has changed so that you can actually put links to other pages, and you can actually post photographs and things as well. So social networks are the things like Facebook and Instagram, and things like Pinterest, if you know it, where people put up photos of their hobbies or something that they're doing. There's many of them. A widget is just something that does something like cleans your phone, something like that. Games that we play. And so I'm sure if you play the free games on your smartphone like I do, there is a huge amount of advertising that comes with them, and the different apps, and then using the mobile phones as well for this social media. So what about mobile media? What's the difference and how people react to mobile advertising? So mobile advertising is where you'll get an advertising message to your phone, but it's not through the internet. It's actually come through the telephone service as an SMS message. Now, where I live in North Cyprus, this is very, very rare. Usually you sign up for it at the shop. They'll ask you as you purchase the product, would you like details, sent to the phone? And so when they've got a sale or if they've got something new in, you might get an SMS message. The other time we get it in Cyprus is if there's been a disaster in another country, like an earthquake or a war, and they ask you if you actually want to donate money, and people generally do, yeah. But in the UK, you'll get a lot more adverts to your phone. In America, apparently, it's just like constant. And I have to say that personally, my reaction to that would be very, very poor. I believe that my telephone is private and I want to use it for private things. I don't want to be bombarded with SMS texts telling me you've just walked past McDonald's, would you like, a meal here? So that people are actually doing that through the GPS and through, the internet says where you are on your phone. They're actually targeting you because they know that you're in a certain area. So is there any monetary value to this? Yes, because you're getting your message across and the customer likes it. They're getting information about a new product or something that's happening at your store. It's very convenient because it's just in people's pockets and it's very easy to send out these messages. It has an emotional value because it's your personal telephone that you're answering, and it has a social value because, again, we use our telephones in a social way. So people in different countries respond differently to these advertisements. So in Japan, the men generally have 2 telephones. Japan was one of the first countries to have total saturation of mobile phones because in Japan, it's a very formal society and they keep their personal life and their work life separate. And so they tend to have one phone for work and one phone for their personal use. And so the mobile ads, the SMS ads in Japan, are very effective as a word of mouth to actually spread the idea about a new product or service. In Korea, it's more dependent on the interface on the phone that people are actually using. And in China, it's about, is it easy to use? Do I actually trust this company? And then the use of language is very important as well. So if you think people don't know who you are, you might want to use a much more serious and clear and concise tone. And again, because of me living abroad, I've seen how this works. So for instance, Turkey and Japan, very formal languages. And so whereas in the UK, you would have a mobile site or a laptop, you're online working on something, the language is very informal. And so it might say, press here for whatever. Whereas in Turkish or in Japanese, it's much more formal and would actually say something like, if you would like to press here. So even though it's online, the tone is very, very different. If something is very credible, say like a company like Coca-Cola or McDonald's, we all know who they are, we know they exist, they can choose to actually be funny when they do messages because we're not worried about whether the information from them is correct or not. So how do we actually measure whether we're being effective with social media? Well, we count it, isn't it? You actually can count how many tweets happened today that mentioned your company name compared to last week. How many clicks happened on your Facebook page from week to week. And so we can actually look at those and we can actually then study how effective that campaign actually was. So we can actually look at people visiting the website. We actually know from the IP address like how many times they came, whether that's a unique visitor. Did they return? How long did they actually spend? Which pages did they look at? Which pages did they click on? Which things did they look at in more detail? Did they have a conversation with us? You might have noticed that some e-commerce sites now have a little pop-up box where you can actually talk to somebody in the company about the product. And they can also have some idea about the demographics of the visitor. So how can they do that? Well, if it's a sort of a generic website and people click in, they can't when you log in. So if you might have noticed many websites, in order to enter a competition or to get more details, they want your email address off you. And sometimes you fill a form in online, your date of birth, your gender, whether you live in the countryside or the city, and then they capture that information and they use that then to understand the demographics. Who's clicking our site? Are they young? Are they old? Is it men? Is it women? What countries do they actually come from? Okay, so they actually look at that. So you can actually measure quite easily through Twitter how influential you are, how many people are following you. Instagram does the same. It shows you how many people you're following, how many people are following you. And so there would be statistics, where you know like what number you need to reach to actually understand that you're making a difference. You can look at how frequently tweets are actually updated, who's using, who's clicking on your tweets. Is it celebrities? Because if you get somebody on Twitter following you and they've got millions of followers, it's quite likely that those people will then follow you. So it's quite important to actually somehow get some interaction with celebrities. Or are they people like these YouTube channel people where they're actually famous for actually making comments? Or is it spam mail? I don't know if you ever noticed when you're using Twitter, some people, they follow you, they're not actually real people, it's just computers. So Google Analyticals is a special part of Google where you can actually record clicks. You don't have to pay for it. It's quite easy to set up, and you can actually figure out what people are doing actually after they land on your page, where they're clicking to, how long they're staying and things like that. So how many people are actually looking at these adverts? How many people are actually receiving your message? So as I said, there are third-party companies. One of the famous ones there is Nielsen, where they will actually do this job for you. So it depends really. Like if you're a small company, it's just like you or you and a few other people, and you're not very computer literate, you might choose to pay another company to give you these statistics. But if you're a young techie company, and you got good programmers working for you, you would actually get them to write the apps to actually collect the data on this. So what's changed about print media and broadcast media to bring them in line with what's actually going on in the electronic world? So if we think about, if I go back to that, most newspapers are now online. Some newspapers in the UK have actually closed. People are not so willing to actually go out and spend money on a newspaper when they can actually read it online. So within the last few years, the very famous The Times newspaper of the UK, they actually introduced a charge, and other newspapers are actually thinking to do that, you know, to not actually be totally free to people who want to read it anymore. So broadcast media, how have they changed? Phenomenally. So not only can you watch your TV programs on your normal television, but they all also broadcast digitally. So you'll be able to look at their website, click on the TV guide, look at the program that's on now, or find a program that you missed. So there are many of these in the UK run by different TV companies where you can look up what they showed last week. Some TV companies are even showing stuff that hasn't gone out yet on the television. Some broadcast media is now totally digital, this idea of streaming. And so traditional TV stations are very, very worried about this, because young people are watching like the YouTube channels, or they're actually paying for a subscription to one of these streaming sites, and the streaming sites are now making their own programs to actually compete with the big media companies. So I think you could find quite a lot of ways that broadcast media has actually changed into using the idea of digital technology and in the use of social media as well. So that's the end of chapter 8. Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.